Hey everyone, how's it going? Azren, the language nerd here, as per usual. Welcome to another episode of Azren's Journal. For those of you who are new to this segment on my channel, which is probably not many of you, I assume it's kind of the same group of people who tend to watch these videos, but just in case. This is the segment on my YouTube channel where I share a whole bunch of language learning advice and, of course, give you some updates and insights into my own personal language learning journey. So let's just dive right into the topic of this video, and then we will go into a few other things that are on my mind today. So the topic, which is the question that I've listed in the title, which is can an adult or can adults learn another language? Now, I think it's not actually that complicated, but I want to dig into it in a little bit of an insightful kind of way. So the short answer is yes, adults can learn another language. Absolutely. There's too many adults who have gone out, tried to learn a language, and who have successfully learned another language for one to say that, oh my God, it's not possible. In other words, there's too many people who've just done it successfully that, of course, it has been proven that it is possible. Now, I think the more interesting thing to look at is why do many adults actually struggle with learning another language? Why do people actually struggle? I think there's a lot to it. We could probably literally make a 1-hour video as to why adults and why people in general struggle with learning a language. But I think some of the main reasons are the following. Number one, we get in our own way. If you follow a YouTube channel called Easy Languages, I make some English videos on their channel. On Wednesday, you're going to see a very interesting video pop up, which is talking about some of the more difficult aspects of learning another language. And there's one person in particular who says it best in that video. He says that he's just got to get out of his own head and get out of his own way. Often what happens to us is we will try to learn another language. We'll try to say things. Maybe we struggle to understand when someone says something to us, and we start to get frustrated, or we start to feel dumb because we didn't say things properly, or someone said, oh my God, that wasn't pronounced right, or oh, they don't understand what you said. And all of a sudden we get stuck in our own heads, which therefore makes it a more difficult process. And we actually convince ourselves or trick ourselves into thinking that it's not possible, or that children learn better than adults do, or that, oh, you're not cut out for it. Oh, this is too hard for you. And so you have to almost quiet a lot of those voices in your mind and understand that it's just an illusion. Literally, like when you watch TV shows or you watch movies, like I actually watched maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, I rewatched one of the Batman movies. And you know how in Batman, I think it's Batman, is it Batman Begins, I believe it's called? Or perhaps it's The Dark Knight. I forget the title. But it's the one in Batman where there's like the scarecrow, right? And he like shoots this gas in your face and it makes you hallucinate. And all of a sudden, all the things that you fear seem to be around you and you think it's real, right? And so, when that happens, you really think everything you're seeing around you is real. You think there's monsters. You think he wants to get you, all of that stuff, but it's just not real, right? It's not. And that's basically what's happening to us. As language learners, often we get stuck in our heads thinking, oh, we can't do it. Oh, I'm not cut out for this. Oh, it's too hard. Oh, I'm an adult, so I learn slowly. Oh, I'm 52, so my memory doesn't work anymore. Maybe there's certain truths to what you're saying, but not to the extent that you believe it is true. So that's, I think, one of the biggest things. Now, there are other things as well that lead to misconceptions. I think people have misconceptions about language learning. They feel that because they're an adult, it's harder. Because they're older, it's harder. Because they're busy with work, it's harder. And there's obviously truth to everything I just said, but again, not to the extent that many people feel. So I think these tend to be some of the bigger challenges that often people have when they are going out to learn another language. A lot of the mental stuff that's going on in their minds. Myself included, I speak 5 languages. I have the exact same challenges, literally the identical ones. I'm not above them. Nobody really is. It's just something we have to try our best to get over. Technical challenges exist as well, but I don't really want to get crazy into them today. Technical challenges meaning things like grammar might be hard, remembering vocabulary might be hard, you might struggle with pronouncing things, and on, like very specific elements of specific languages might be hard for certain adults, and of course, those might be challenges and pain points, and even for me, they are. But I do find that the biggest thing tends to be a mental block more than anything else. So let's go into other language learning topics and other topics that I want to get into. I think the first one, which will be a really insightful thing for language learners, is my initial processes of tackling or learning another language. So one thing that happened that's really cool about would have been roughly a week ago and also 2 days ago is I started once again to learn some Arabic. So for those of you who don't know my story, roughly 10 years ago, I did about 1 or 2 hours of Arabic study. I then didn't touch Arabic really in any formal way for most of my life. A couple of years ago, I did 1 or 2 more hours of formal study, didn't really touch it. And now I did a little bit more. I've done 2 hours in the past 2 weeks. And I wanted to share, again, as I was saying, the early things that I've been doing, and I think that I tend to do differently than many, many other language learners that I've seen. And I think if some people can probably learn from the things that I've done and that I do when I learn languages early on. Number one, I put a heavy emphasis. By the way, N.A. Sir in the chat, I see you. I'm going to answer your question in just a moment about how to learn English fast. We'll answer that in just one moment. Now, let me just talk about this Arabic stuff, then we'll jump to your question. I think number one, I put a heavy emphasis on pronunciation and the phonetics of the language early on. When I was learning Arabic a couple of days ago with a friend of mine, literally the entire hour that we spent together was on him saying certain words and me and him saying them over and over, so it sounded familiar to my ears. So my ears could say, okay, I can actually hear the word. I can hear all the letters. I can hear all of the sounds. I tried to say them a bunch of times myself. I wanted to be able to pronounce it well too. It's not going to be perfect. My goal was to sound perfect, but I wanted to sound as close to perfect as I could within considering that I haven't really done a lot of study with the language. I wanted to feel natural in my mouth. So we did a lot of practice with the sounds of the language. And I find that whenever I'm learning languages, I put a significant emphasis on the sounds of the language early on, and I practice them a lot. I think that if you do this, there's a few different benefits. Number one, you're going to have a good pronunciation, which means that people are going to praise you, which means that you're going to feel confident. You're going to get confidence boosters all the time because people are going to say, wow, you sound so good. Wow, you sound so natural. Wow, you sound amazing. Oh my goodness. Number two, it's going to help you with listening comprehension. The better grasp you have on the sounds of another language, the easier it's going to be for your brain to process those sounds when you hear them, meaning that as you go further along with your studies and you hear people speak and you hear people talk, it's going to be much easier for you to understand. I think those are probably two major benefits. And the third one is that the language will just feel more friendly and more natural. One thing that happens to many language learners is even when they actually have a reasonably advanced level in the language, they do not feel like they have a very advanced level because the language does not feel very natural to them. They do not feel that, oh, they're strong at the language. They don't feel comfortable when they're speaking. By the way, happens to me as well, even with all the focus I put on pronunciation and the sounds of the language. However, I will say this, because I put such a focus on the sounds of the language, I will say that for myself, there are many circumstances where I, how do I say this? Where I feel and come across as a lot more confident than perhaps I should be, considering the experience that I had at that point in time. So a great example is, I remember when I was first in China, I didn't really know any Mandarin at the time, very, very little. But all my classmates, all my friends thought that I was so good because I would be able to walk into a restaurant or walk up to someone, ask them where something is, understand the directions given, and have that very quick, 15-second conversation with confidence, with fluency, sounding natural. People understood me. I understood the gist of what people were saying to me. And so it gave me extra confidence. I was able to get through things very naturally, but primarily because I had such an emphasis on the sounds of the language. Now, the last thing we'll talk about in this video is the question in our chat here. So we have N.A. Sir says, I want to learn English fast. How do I do it? Two answers to that. Number one, it takes time to learn a language, but the one shortcut I can say as I'm sitting here in front of this camera, the one shortcut I can say, the one thing everybody can do to speed up the process, and I'm going to feel weird saying it, is cutting corners. Cutting corners. What does this mean? This means you're studying a language and you're specifically choosing not to study certain parts of the language. You're specifically choosing, hey, you know what? I don't care if I have this super thick accent, so I'm not going to worry about pronunciation. I don't care if I know every single word. I just want to get through my day-to-day life. I don't care if people think I sound funny, because I'm not going to work on that. I don't care if I fully understand what everybody says. I just want to get the gist of what they say. It reminds me a lot of, there's a documentary I watched on YouTube called How I Learned Spanish in 1 Month or something like that, done by Connor Grooms, I believe his name is, something like that. I interviewed him like 3 years ago on the channel. Feel free to go back into the podcast and interviews playlist on my channel. Go all the way back. It's one of the first interviews I ever did. So I remember watching the video, and there's this one small clip where he was given advice by, I forget who it was, but they said, don't worry initially about learning the grammar conjugations. Just say, today I eat an apple. Yesterday I eat an apple. Tomorrow I eat an apple. I eat an apple if I had more time. Those are all grammatically incorrect, right? But it speeds up the process to you being able to communicate and get your message across. Does that make sense? So cutting corners is probably the one thing I can say to speed the process up. Just understand that there's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't know, and you're going to make mistakes, and it's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be issues, and sometimes people won't understand, and perhaps it will affect you in different areas of your life. Like if you're moving to Canada and you've cut most corners or many corners with English, you might have a hard time finding a job because you're making so many grammatical mistakes. You don't sound very natural, and employers don't want to hire you, maybe. So you have to understand what corners you're cutting and be very conscious about what corners you're cutting. There's always a consequence when you cut corners. The one last example I'll give, then we'll finish this video up here. The one last example I will give for cutting corners is like Mandarin. When I first started learning, I did not focus on reading at all. Reading or writing, I did not focus. I only focused on speaking and listening. Meaning when I went to China, I couldn't read restaurant menus. I was completely useless. Like it was really hard for me to read and function. I was illiterate, and it was super hard. Or even things like writing. I've only recently really been focusing on writing. And even now, I don't do a crazy amount of writing practice. I do the bare minimum, which means I've gotten better, but I'm still not great. And my writing is now legible, but like my writing is not strong. Meaning if I need to write something by hand, I can't do it. It means that I have certain circumstances, like yesterday where I was driving someone. I had a Chinese composition sitting in my car. Two Chinese people in my car, one of them looks at it and they're both kind of looking at it. And they're like, they made a comment like, oh, Azren, do you struggle with maintaining the structure of like certain characters? Like, we can tell your printing we can tell from your printing. Wasn't a negative thing, but they didn't compliment me. It was, it made me feel like, oh man, like, I spent so much time on that composition. And the one comment they make is, oh, your writing's kind of messy. It's like, oh man, but that's a choice I've made. It's a choice I've made by choosing to cut that corner. So anyway, I've got to go. So we'll wrap this video up a little bit sooner than usual. I'd appreciate some likes, comments, any thoughts you have about the video as a whole. Dislikes if you didn't like the video, that's totally fine as well. Totally your decision. And we will talk very, very soon. Bye for now.